Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here for the third time today. We're going to jump into part 2 of Day 18's testimony. But first, if you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day. The first love song to top the Billboard Hot 100 was the Teddy Bear song, To Know Him Is to Love Him, back in December 1958. Zulima was back on the stand after lunch with her blonde hair. It starts off with the jury being out. There were a couple of interviews that he wanted to come in. He's trying really to impeach her testimony. He asked her if her understanding is the body would have to die if the spirit was cast out. Zulima said the way Chad explained it is they would expel the demon out of the body and put protection around the body so no other entity could come in. She said they never talked about killing the body. Judge Boyce ruled that he wouldn't allow the audio to be published. Pryor asked for a sidebar. Judge Boyce is like, nope. They play some other audio. It's her talking about the 7 gatherers. She said it's the group exchanging information through a shared email. She doesn't know if she still has access to it. Judge Boyce asks what it is that she said this impeachable. Pryor says they used the email a few times, and her testimony with officers is she said frequently, and it's inconsistent with what she said on the stand. She said, I think they used this group more than she says. Judge Boyce said this is a small portion of a 4-hour interview and it can't come in, but Pryor can ask her now since she's heard that audio. The jury comes back in and they resume cross-exam. Chad and Lori never spoke of killing a body. She says correct. Her understanding is if a casting is successful, the body dies. He said, you spoke about Charles and you were at a casting. Who all was there? She said the first time it was herself, Christina, Nicole, Serena, Lori, and Gib. Pryor says almost the 7 gatherers. Zulima said the email address hadn't even been created at that time. He asked if the account was used on a regular basis, and she said it was used for a little bit. She can't say how much was shared in that email. She said it was probably used frequently. On the casting for Charles, 5 or 6 of the gatherers were there, and one was Melanie Gibb. Was she running that casting? Zulima said nope, Lori was. He says, you say the casting was successful at the time. And Zulima said Lori called Chad to verify, and he said it was. She thinks that casting happened at the end of March 2019, and he asked if she got a notice that Charles Vallow died as a result of the casting. She said she thinks that Chad said the person had died, but there was a 2-minute window where another evil spirit could come in. They were teaching that the body was dead and being occupied by an evil spirit. She said it's really more accurate to say that if the casting worked, the body would die naturally. John Pryor points out that Charles Vallow did not die, though, did he? And Zulima says the spirit or the body. She said the body would have been Charles's, but it would have been occupied by the evil spirit. Pryor talks about that second casting being successful, and she says, according to Chad and Lori, it was. Then Pryor says, isn't it true, ma'am? All the information you got was from Lori, not Chad speaking to you. And Zulima says, not all the time. She said, sometimes things came through Chad as well. Then Pryor doesn't like that answer. He's like, let me rephrase the question. Did the majority come from Lori? She says, yes. He asked about a date of this second casting. She doesn't remember. Pryor tells Zulima that she was very specific with the state, but when he asked you dates, she doesn't remember. And she said, I don't remember the date. No. She remembers Lori moving to Hawaii in February or March of 2019. She also remembers when Lori got back with Charles, saying she needed to clear up some financial issues. The defense asked if she ever said that she asked Charles to make her the beneficiary again. Zulima says no. Lori just said she needed to get her finances taken care of. They move on to these conferences, and the defense says you were at the Mesa conference and the St. George, Utah conference. Did Chad ever mention a vision about Tammy's short life? And not that she remembers. They move on to portals. Other than what Chad and Lori told you about portals, what's your knowledge about portals? She said nothing other than the movies. He said, you first heard about zombies from Gib in February, and Zulima said Gib and Lori. Pryor says Lori was relying on Social Security to support herself. Yes. Pryor brings in another illustration, the one with the ovals and the worlds and how it all lines up and down. And not gonna lie, y'all, Pryor confused the fool out of me. Not even gonna attempt to unravel all that. She said you could go from a 1 to 6 on the light dark scales, according to Lori and Chad. Pryor asked if she talked to people about having visions where they came during energy sessions. Yes. She talked about cutting and destroying cords, and her vision involved cutting cords and destroying all records around you. He asked if she remembers that. No. He brings in a text from Lori's iCloud Lori for Style account to refresh her memory. He said there's a discussion about an energy session with a friend and asked what kind of energy session it was. Zulema says the person connects to your energy to see if there's any negative energy or anything that would influence you in a negative way, and then the person removes it. He asked if she remembers that the message was sent in February of 2019 to Lori. The comment from Zulema is, "Hey, beautiful. Had an energy session with Stacy." Pryor asked if Lori encouraged her to have the energy session, and she doesn't think so. In that message, Zulema talks about putting a metal cage and blocking her from having visions, and Pryor asks, what does that mean? Zulema explains it's not physical, it's spiritual. He asked if that's consistent with LDS beliefs, and it's not. February 13th of 2019, you said, "I will create a storm and bring protection to you." Pryor asked, what kind of storm are we bringing? Pryor, ask your client because he's the one that brought the storm. But she said a spiritual protection. She emailed Lori one night and said that she herself was attacked and heard an unrecognizable voice beside her. Zulema doesn't remember this. And so Pryor, of course, shows that text to her and says it was sent to Lori. He asked Zulema, what attacked you? She said some demons. Did Chad or Lori tell you you were being attacked by demons? Nope, that was on her own. He says you woke up with a lot of pain in the same place, the third eye and the crown. He said, what is that? She said it's on the forehead. Pryor says, is there a third eye on the forehead? And she said, it's your third eye, like your senses. She remembers talking about protecting Lori, and he asked, when was that? She doesn't know, so he gives her a copy, and then he says November 3rd, 2018. Then he asks, when did Lori meet Chad? Zulema said October of 2018. Pryor asked if that's at the end of the year in 2018, and Zulema was like, it's the fall. Zulema talked to Lori about getting a clear message. Lori is to be protected. Pryor asks, where did you get the message from? Zulema said in meditation and prayers. He asked if that's part of the LDS faith, and she says yes. Pryor says, as part of your meditation and prayer, you had angels tell you Lori needs to be protected. If the angels jumping for joy say yes, yes, yes 3 times, he says, as part of your prayer, you had angels saying Lori needed protecting and you should be her protector. Zulema says, I think you misstated that. She said it was as if they said yes, yes, yes. She says, am I correct on that? Pryor's like, oh, you're correct. He kind of stutters and says, who did you ask if you should be Lori's protector? And Zulema said, I usually talk to God. He asked if she remembers sending an email to a number of people saying angels talk to men and women. She said no. He gives her a copy and she reads it. He says there's Gib, Melanice, Nicole, Zulema, Serena, April, Christina, and Lori. They were a witness of what? When you say angels still talk to men and women, does that imply men and women are both good? She said, no, I was referring to the testimony Lori gave, saying she had visions with angels and received direction from angels. He asked if Chad encouraged her to have visions with these angels. No. He asked if those names he read off, are they the 7 gatherers? Yes. He asked if she sent Lori a message about a visit in the celestial room. That was on November 29th of 18. Zulema says, hey, love, I'm leaving now. Have to go to work. LOL. Pryor says, what's funny about going to work? She said, it's just a comment. He said, you went on to say you had the most amazing visit in the celestial room. Where? Zulema says, at the temple. And Pryor says, you're letting her know you were there. That's a month after you met Chad. And did Lori or Chad tell you to have the vision? No. You went on to say you had to tell her about it. You said you were going to Melanie's tomorrow night. Would that be Gib? She says, I don't know. He says, November 30th, 2018, you were going to some Melanie's. Where are you living? Gilbert, Gib, Gilbert, Lori, Gilbert, or Chandler. You heard about someone shooting at Brandon Boudreaux. Who's accused of doing that? She says, Alex. Did you have any involvement or know he was going to do that? No. He asked when she met Alex, and she said at a conference in November of 2018. He says something about her memory. There's an objection that's sustained. He asked if the November 2018 conference is the one that Chad was speaking at. She said the one in Mesa, and that was where he sold his books as well. The St. George conference was October 2018. He asked if Alex and Chad were close at that time, and she said no. He says, you know the allegation of Charles Vallow about who shot him. He said initially that was deemed self-defense, and the police changed their thoughts on that. Are you aware Chad hasn't been criminally implicated? Zulema said she was not aware of that. She saw Alex a few times at Lori's, and in August, they went to dinner together. This would have been 2019, by the way. She got engaged to him in November of 2019, and he asked, how many dates did you go on after you got engaged? She said 3. He asked when they got married. She said the end of November. If he's trying to make her look bad for going on 3 dates and getting married, let's not mention the fact that his client allegedly killed his wife and then got married 2 weeks later. So let's just move on. He asked if she was prepared prior to her testimony, prepped by the state. She said she had interviews with the prosecution. When? When I arrived in Boise Sunday night. He says you've been interviewed by a number of police, and she doesn't know how many. He asked if she remembers discussing the case with Detective Hermosillo, April 29th, 21 in Arizona. She does remember parts of it. He asked if there was a discussion about making her testimony credible. Well, there's a sidebar. She watched the video with the jury out of the room with Detective Hermosillo. It was just a little piece of it. At the time, her discussions with Detective Hermosillo, they were just talking about making her testimony more credible. Pryor says you're making inconsistent statements to other police, and he was trying to reconcile those. Yes, he was making it how a defense attorney may attack you based on those inconsistent statements. He was aiding you so the defense wouldn't attack you. Yes. He says, and Detective Hermosillo is who? She said from the Rexburg PD. Pryor says that Officer Kaikamanu and your attorney were there. Yes. Pryor says you're trying to get your story straight to testify. Yes. Yeah. Objection sustained. Left and right, up and down, all around, nonstop. Pryor asked, do you understand the purpose of trying to get your story straight? She said there were inconsistencies and he wanted to clarify those to get ahead of what you're doing right now. Objection sustained. He wants Zulima to review this again. Judge Boyce said there's nothing she doesn't recall. And he said there's been objections to your questions. Again, he says that the officers were aiding you in resolving different statements you made in the past. There were 3 objections back to back here, mostly sustained. One was overruled. And it goes back to the question, he was aiding you in resolving different statements you made in the past. He asked the question again, and Judge Boyce tells John Pryor she hasn't answered. Judge Boyce says, we're just not going to keep going down this path of asked and answered. Let's just change the topic. I mean, y'all, there were probably 20 objections in a row. He asked if any other time did she meet to discuss her testimony. She doesn't think so. He asked, would you agree with Hermosillo in the past and talking with police? You've had an occasion to tell inconsistent stories. There's an objection. That one's overruled. Zulima said they talked about something that she said that she just didn't remember. She said there's plenty of times she doesn't remember. Do you have a recollection of Detective Hermosillo saying you gave inconsistent statements? Yes. Finally, we get on redirect. Prosecutor Blake is up. Apparently, this inconsistent statement revolved around a question that Zulima was asked when Alex was dying in the ER. They were doing CPR and resuscitation. She has no recollection of what happened at all that night. The prosecutor points out there were many interviews done, and she's discussed a lot of things. The prosecutor asked who was teaching about the translation process. Chad. Was Lori teaching? No. She sat on the couch as a student, not a teacher. Chad stayed in Lori's house in November of 2018. Were there any other men there? She said that she wasn't with him the whole time. She left after she got her blessing, but there were no other men there. She doesn't know if Lori and Chad had interactions after she left. And the prosecutor asked if Chad's teaching were standard LDS teachings. No. She asked Zulima if at the time she believed Chad could discern light from dark. She said, yeah, he indicated he could because he had a near-death experience and had no veil, which enabled him to communicate with the spirit world. Chad and Lori said the spirit had to be attached to the body by a certain amount of cords, and those cords needed to be cut for the body to die. Chad told Zulima she had gifts and to practice them. She first learned of spiritual attacks in the scripture about people being possessed and attacked by evil spirits. But of course, Lori and Chad's descriptions, very different from scripture, more detailed the way they were teaching it. They talk about spiritual weapons. She would turn to Chad to ask for help, and he said he could. He said he could visualize these spiritual weapons and then remove those. Talk about the 7 gatherers. That was a Gmail account, right? Yes. 7 people had access? Yes. For casting, Chad and Lori talked to Zulima at different times about castings. If a casting was successful, a spirit would be cast out and another could come in. Would that mean the first wasn't successful? It wouldn't mean the first wasn't successful, and Zulima confirms that. What happens if a spirit comes in and what happens to the body? Zulima said the body would die naturally. Lindsay Blake, again, cleans it up on redirect. Was Tylee deemed dark? There was an objection that was overruled. Yes. Had she been possessed and was a zombie? Yes. Is Tylee alive? No. Was Charles deemed dark? Yes. Is he alive? No. Was JJ deemed dark? Yes. Is JJ alive? No. Was Tammy deemed dark? Yes. Is Tammy alive? No. The state excuses Zulima, but Pryor has her under subpoena from his office, so not excused. Trigger warning. The next witness up is Garth Warren, the medical examiner who did the autopsies on JJ and Tylee. If you are sensitive to this stuff, click off now, and you might not want to watch the first half of tomorrow because he is not finished on direct. They go through the credentials and they talk about the 5 manners of death: natural, accident, self-inflicted, homicide, and undetermined. JJ's autopsy was done June 11th, 2020 at the Ada County Coroner's Office. He had never seen JJ before. His autopsy took about 4 hours to complete. JJ was in a black body bag and he broke the seal, and JJ was wrapped in what he said was a tarp with multiple strips of duct tape. Once they removed all of that, he was able to get a good look at JJ. There's a plastic bag over his head and it was wrapped around the face with duct tape all the way to the neck. The forearms and hands and ankles were bound with duct tape, and he was in the red pajamas, a pull-up, and black socks. The only part of his skin that was showing at that time was his upper arms, and he could see visually that JJ was in a state of decomposition. He took photos of the autopsies. After those were done, they undressed him and gave all that stuff to law enforcement. Then they removed the plastic bag and the duct tape and gave that to law enforcement as well. They collected other evidence once all the clothing was removed, hand and nail swabs. They submitted all the nails and oral swabs and just other swabs. There were some external signs of trauma. There were scratches just to the left side of his neck. There was bruising on his right and left upper arms that were symmetrical. And he talks about that hemorrhaging where he made an incision and saw that there was blood in the soft tissue. So those bruises were fresh. Also, his right thumbnail, he had the injury. He said he likened it to slamming your finger in a door and the blood pools under your fingernail. He saw possible bruising on the ankles after they removed the duct tape, but sometimes decomposition can look like bruising. And there were things they did to rule in or out those on the arms and the ankles. He wasn't able to tell if the ones on his ankles were from decomposition or if they were in fact bruises. He talks about the internal exam. He said that there was decomposition changes, but no evidence of overt trauma or disease. He checked for rib fractures and saw none, and the x-rays were clear of any fractures. Due to decomposition, there was no blood or urine for toxicology. They did take 2 molars, part of a rib, hair samples, and a liver sample. As far as the toxicology in the liver, there were low levels of ethanol, which is alcohol. It could be a byproduct of decomposition, but he can't say JJ was not exposed to alcohol before he was killed. They also found GHB. It's a drug that can be used for narcolepsy. At one time, it was used as an anesthetic, and it's also known as liquid ecstasy or the date rape drug. The GHB is naturally found in the human body, and the amount in JJ's body was inconclusive. It can be found in the liver post-mortem. It did concern him, but he was unable to tell if that was natural from decomposition or if JJ was drugged. He found caffeine didn't worry him, and then theobromine, that's found in tea or cocoa products, that didn't worry him. They move on to Tylee's autopsy, They're going to finish up JJ's tomorrow, but due to the fact it was late in the day, they didn't want to have to rearrange everybody in the courtroom to that one side. So he went into this. He did Tylee's autopsy June 11th, 2020, the same day as JJ's at the same coroner's office in Ada County. Hers lasted about a week due to the condition of her remains being dismembered and burned. He said she was received in multiple bags. There were 2 sealed body bags and then a brown paper bag with 5 additional paper bags in that were sealed, and they contained remains, a combination of bone, tissue, organ, mud, dirt, and other debris. He wrote a report for Tylee's autopsy, and the cause of death, homicide by unspecified means. They just can't tell specifically how she was killed due to the state of her body. There's criteria that they would rule this homicide by unspecified means. She was dismembered and burned, so obviously that supports a homicide. Also, if you don't have enough of the remains to do a full autopsy, toxicology they looked at, there was nothing that contributed to her death in that. And they look for any explanation for her to be dead. He didn't think based on her medical records there was any reason she should be dead. Multiple bouts of pancreatitis. He said in adolescence, it's a wide variety of things. It could be as simple as your anatomy that causes pancreatitis. It could be prescriptions. They never figured out why she got them, but they did say when Tylee took antibiotics, she seemed to have a flare up. And that was all for today. It's just so heavy to hear about these autopsies, and it really gives the purpose of why we're here. With Zulima, I think that I never had on my Daybell bingo card that I would be rooting for Zulima today, but I wanted her to just kind of trip Pryor up, and she really didn't falter on the stand, and she was done. So we'll see if he brings her back. Tomorrow, look for 2 episodes to sum up the testimony. Until then, hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We will see you soon.